Hi guys, welcome back to the High On podcast. Good to be back. Me and Pete haven't recorded for about 2 weeks. Both been busy with uni, unfortunately, but back again, thankfully. It is Paddy's Day, so happy St. Patrick's Day. It's currently, obviously, 17th of March, Friday. It is 4:05 p.m. Episode 29 as well, getting to 30 nearly. Good to be back. How are you doing, Pete?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. The weather's nice here in Manchester, so can't complain.
Yeah, good stuff. Let's get into it then. So what are the topics you wanted to talk about today?
Yeah, so we've just got some general topics we'll kind of discuss. Firstly, was in a bit of a rut the other day and last week and stuff, and I was just thinking about these kind of like negative emotions that kind of boil up in you, well, in myself anyway, like almost anger and frustration and stuff. And I want to kind of discuss like what the outputs are for those emotions. The traditional ones almost contrast each other a bit. You've got physical exercise, which is all about like getting the heart rate up, sweating it out almost. And then on the other side of that, you've got meditation, which kind of the act of being still and being present and taking your time just to let your emotions and your thoughts kind of flow through you. Yeah, those two things seem to work for everybody. I'd say 100% almost. Maybe meditation's a little bit more challenging for most people, myself included. But what are your thoughts on that, Pete?
Yeah, it's interesting that they can both seem to solve the same problem, but through completely different mechanisms. But it's probably best for people to implement some element of both. But to get to the point of why these things work, so I guess we can start with letting out your anger through channeling it into something else. So whether that be a martial art hitting a heavy bag or something where you're doing a physical activity and you're actually using that aggression to physically exert yourself. Because, one thing about anger, obviously it's negative in a lot of contexts, but one of the positive things about it is a source of energy and it is a source of motivation. And perhaps rather than trying to get rid of it or wishing that you didn't have it, you could channel it into something positive, and that could have some benefits on different areas of your life, because you are using this energy to improve different areas, and it's also probably a healthy way of using your anger for something which is positive. Whereas if you leave it, it will probably end up turning into resentment and could turn into you being aggressive to people unnecessarily, which could negatively affect your relationships and overall probably just have a negative effect on your life. So what are your thoughts on how anger can be channeled through physical exercise?
Yeah, I think it's maybe the most accessible way to channel anger. I think one of the reasons I've kind of been getting a little bit frustrated the last few weeks is because I haven't been able to go to training for about 3 weeks. And I think that's the main reason why I've like noticed myself getting a bit more frustrated easily. Like, although I've been going to the gym and stuff, like finishing a training session, you get that. Well, I get that sense of like just exhaustion at the end, and you kind of get a peace of mind from it. Whereas at the gym, maybe because I'm not pushing myself as much as I should be, you don't necessarily get as like physically exerted to an extent. I don't know if that's to do with the fact that you're physically exerting yourself at different levels, or because jiu-jitsu is kind of like a kill or be killed like environment, which kind of intensifies it a bit. That maybe could be one of the reasons, but but I think it's interesting how anger gets channeled through exercise, because like you were saying, it's definitely a source of energy, but at the same time you can't let anger and those other sort of emotions be the main source of your energy when you're like for example, a combat sport. If you in any sport actually, to be fair, I was playing tennis the other day. I wasn't playing very well and I was getting angry, and I was trying to use the anger to almost motivate myself to be better. But I found that just trying to calm down, I did play better. Like, anger definitely is a source of energy, but I think it's difficult for most people to tame that energy and use it in a positive way.
Yeah, Yeah, that makes sense. And I think if you rely on anger too much, because there's an element of anger, although it's considered to be a negative thing, there is actually, like, there's a stimulation of dopamine when you're angry. So there's an element of positive emotion for being angry, which it probably explains why when someone gets into an angry state, that it's hard for them to get out of, because there is a part of it which is like thrilling and enjoyable in a kind of messed up way. And it's the same reason why probably so many people online on Twitter and stuff are so aggressive to each other, because they do get that dopamine kick out of spreading negativity and about being outraged and angry about something. So I think it certainly can be damaging to allow. I think the distinction is when you allow your anger to take control of you, that's when it turns into a negative thing. Whereas when you take control of your anger, you can start to channel it into a more positive thing. But it is interesting there. You mentioned how anger is often the opposite of what you want in sports. Like, you referred to jiu-jitsu, and if you're overly aggressive and angry especially against someone more skilled, all that's going to happen is you're going to be tired and you're going to be less technical, so it'll actually have a negative effect on you. But yeah, I think it's interesting because perhaps there's different types of anger as well. For example, there's an anger where you're just purely outraged, kind of similar emotions to what like a toddler would be when they're having a temper tantrum. And obviously I think that sort of anger where you're just enraged with and filled with like passion and emotion, dedicated towards like hating something, that type of anger, like that's not going to be good for sports. But there's also a type of anger which is almost more cold and calculated, and that's probably maybe, and perhaps it's the same anger but channeled in different ways. But if you have a bit of a chip on your shoulder, but you conduct yourself in kind of a cold and calculated way, for example, in a jiu-jitsu match, it can give you the extra kind of drive you need, but you're still just like a kind of cold emotionally, even though you have this angry emotion inside you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember I saw this with my coach like a few months ago, and we were talking about Mikey Musumeci. He's one of the best jiu-jitsu guys at the moment. He's I don't know what weight he is, but he's quite light. Like, he's not very heavy at all, but he's a really, really happy guy, and he seems like genuinely just happy to be there and enjoy the sport, even when he's competing against someone at the highest level. And I can't remember who he's matched up against, but the person who he was matched up against kind of was in a bit of an angry state and wouldn't shake his hand or something along the lines of that, or like said some comments that Mikey didn't agree with. I was thinking maybe the person who was like the opponent should have been a bit more respectful and like had some more respect for the sport itself, and conducted himself in a more proper way. But my coach was kind of saying, like, that's sort of what you want when you're going against the best in the world. You need to have that anger to like motivate yourself almost. And like, those two are both elite, but Mikey competes in the sport in a happy way, whereas this other guy seems to like have a more of a aggressive like style, you could say. I used to think maybe the aggressive style would get you more in trouble than it did benefit you, but I think like with that after that conversation with my coach, like, I realised the benefits of it, like you were saying as well.
I think it probably varies a lot between individuals, because you do see some people, for example, at jiu-jitsu competitions I've been to, you watch certain matches and you just see some people are just ridiculously aggressive. They push the boundaries of the rules, they're arguing with the ref. It happens in different sports as well. But it seems like for some people to be in that competitive mindset, they just need to be like pissed off and very kind of emotionally volatile in a way where they're just ready to kick off about anything. And I think for certain people, they get that's what they're like when they're in a competitive mindset. Whereas I feel like for myself, I'm just don't, like in a sporting context, I just really don't get angry at things at all. For example, playing five-a-side, a lot of times there's a few people on my team who would just be so annoyed when the ref makes a certain decision, but I literally just feel like no emotion about it. Or if someone fouls me, even if they are being a bit of a dick, I just don't really take it in. Like, I don't become that emotionally invested.
Yeah, you're not very reactionary, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, I'm just not that bothered. I'm very kind of matter of fact, and but perhaps that's just a different attitude towards things, and it probably varies for person to person. And for certain people, in order for them to be motivated and compete, it might be advantageous to use their anger.
Do you think there's a big difference between, like, in a sporting context? I remember I was talking to my cousin, and he, like, a few weeks ago, he was saying how he wanted to stop getting as angry at himself. Like, when he would make a mistake or something, he would, like, just get annoyed and like critique himself in his own head, like, straight away. Do you think there's a big difference between getting angry at yourself and the way you're playing versus getting angry at other people? Like, do you think if people get angry at other people but maintain control of their own bodies, that can be quite a good source of energy and, like, help their performance?
I think it's probably more beneficial. I think the risk is at being angry at someone else is that you build up this kind of victim mindset, and you are likely to become resentful if the outcome doesn't come your way, because you'll blame it on other people if that's where your anger is. I think the more proper place to have your anger is probably at your own mistakes, because that drives you to improve. But at the same time, if your anger at yourself keeps you so hung up on your mistake that you made, that, let's say if it's in the context of jiu-jitsu match, if you make a mistake at the start of the match, or if it's in a chess game, you blunder a piece on the 10th move or something, you don't want to carry that. You don't want to be thinking about that for the rest of the game. You kind of just need to make the best move available on the chess move, given the available on the boards based on the situation you're in now. And I think anger you can get caught up on things which aren't actually useful, and because it can be, like I said, there's a bit of dopamine stimulation when you're angry. That's probably why people get caught up on certain things, when the proper way to be is perhaps, if you hear about some of the best competitors of all time, like Kobe or Michael Jordan, and you hear stories about how, or even Cristiano Ronaldo, I've heard stories like this, like they lose a game of pool or table tennis and they're just fuming for weeks about it. But that's probably, that attitude has pushed them to the top, and they're probably more angry at themselves than anyone else. And those type of people, the very competitive mindsets, they use their anger to drive themselves to improve. But in a competition sense, you do see, I think there is actually a big variation between different individuals, because you see certain competitors who are just very light-hearted about the whole thing. And like there's a spectrum. So you get some people who are super angry and heated, and that's how they compete. People who are more cold and calculated, and then other people who are very almost like cheerful and easygoing. And these are different approaches to things. So I think there is some individual variation. But for certain competitors, being angry at yourself can really help you to fix your mistakes.
Yeah. Well, okay, kind of going back in time a bit, like, why do you think that being in an angry state almost gives this, well, it does give this release of dopamine? Do you think that was kind of something that was kind of programmed in a way that benefits humans back in the day, or did it kind of happen by accident? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure exactly why. It would seem that it wouldn't have been just a coincidence or a mistake. It seems highly likely to me that there's some kind of evolutionary benefit to being to being motivated to be angry. Have you got any ideas about why that is?
I think when the human experience was a little bit more simpler, when we had just the responsibilities of like survival, when you get angry in those sort of contexts, it would usually be something that was actually important, compared to today, where like I broke a pot earlier and I was like pissed off for like 5-10 minutes, but realistically it's just a pot and I can just get a new one. Whereas back in the day, I feel like the only times you would necessarily get angry was because someone made a mistake and you've not been able to forage enough food, or someone made a mistake and like an animal's coming to attack you. And when you're angry, you need that motivation to fix that problem, because it is a like existential problem. So I think that's maybe where it's come from.
Yeah, it's interesting actually in terms of that being a use for anger, because a lot of people admire, kind of promote the idea that in a situation where something has gone wrong, say a colleague has made a mistake, or I remember I recently listened to David Goggins' audiobooks, and he was talking about how on one of his ultramarathons, the person who was supposed to be doing the route for him, he was like pacing him as well, took him the wrong way, like several miles, and I think they went quite a far way off course. And then when he found out about it, like initially he was very angry, but then he kind of realized, and this is kind of what I think about a lot of situations, that, there's been a mistake has happened, but there is absolutely no utility in having a go at someone because they've made a mistake. Like, you're in the situation you are now, and you just need to make the best move that you can. And so to me, it seems like a better way to handle the situations is to actually not go with the kind of initial instinct to have a go at someone if they've made a mistake which has negatively affected you, just to kind of take responsibility, take ownership of the situation and go from there, which isn't really, you're kind of suppressing the state of anger there. So it's interesting that we've evolved to be somewhat driven towards anger. And I suppose from an evolutionary perspective, in a way, you need to be somewhat selfish. And I think if you're angry about something, that will drive you to make, it'll drive you to, for example, not let other people take advantage of you. Whereas if you're someone who hasn't really got an aggressive side, then you won't really be able to stand up for yourself. So perhaps there's a lot of benefits similar to what we spoke about with integrating the shadow and integrating your anger. Like, it allows you to stand up for yourself, potentially be more competitive, be more, stand up for your values more, stand up for what you care, not take injustice. So perhaps those things are a useful effect of anger.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sometimes it's difficult to like navigate that though, because a person I look up to is like Jocko Willink, and one of his big principles is always like detach. When you get into a situation, you need to detach your emotions, like you were saying with David Goggins and stuff, and just look at the situation, look at the variables that you can control, and act upon those. But I guess would you say maybe when talking about integrating the shadow, do you think the bulk of the work for integrating the shadow in terms of anger and aggression, should that be done not in a reactionary sense, but more so in alone time? Like, people need to kind of think through it when they're by themselves, and then when the situation comes, act upon what they've thought through, rather than, like, let's say someone like pushes you out of the way of like in the queue or something, rather than reacting and like getting angry and aggressive and getting physically aggressive. If someone was to think about like how to integrate their shadow properly, using aggression beforehand when they were by themselves, walking to wherever they're going, maybe they could react in like a better way, but still being a person that stands up for themselves.
Yeah, that seems like probably the more sophisticated way of doing it, and probably the right way of doing it. So there's different things that can happen so a situation stimulates you to be angry. So there's an initial decision between whether you get angry and kick off in that moment, or whether you detach and control yourself in that moment. And then later on down the road, there's a decision about whether you take the time to examine why you became angry, examine whether it is a real problem or whether you're just a problem, and then a decision whether to go out and act on that. So if you're the type of person who just kicks off instantly, for that type of person, their issue is going to be not being able to detach and think about making a actual good decision. They're just acting upon their emotions, which I'd say obviously, well, usually isn't a good thing. Although there's something to be said for being in touch with kind of your natural instincts. So if if someone does something to wrong you, perhaps there is some benefit in being in not trying to suppress that aggression and being able to channel that aggression. And perhaps that's an appropriate response in some situations, but oftentimes not. So oftentimes it is better to detach. But then comes the next thing. If you do just suppress the emotion, but you don't go and do the work to think back about what happened and potentially go and stand up for yourself, then that risks the anger becoming suppressed, because you might have controlled yourself and not got so angry in the moment, but what that's led to is there is a problem and there is something you're angry about, but you're just deciding not to show it, which leads to the whole shadow problem that we've discussed before. And then obviously there's a step perhaps beyond that where you need to if you take the time to realize that there's something wrong in the situation, and then you can, from a detached perspective, go on and use that aggression in a way to go and stand up for yourself and address the problem. Perhaps the ideal scenario would be in a situation which makes you angry, you have the emotional control to detach, but you also have kind of the awareness to be able to judge a situation and think, yeah, there is a problem here. So from this detached perspective, I am still going to, show a certain amount of aggression in order to stand up for myself, because even though I'm detached from the emotion, I'm aware that it's there and I'm aware that's representative of a problem. So perhaps there are situations where you could actually do that in the moment if you have everything properly integrated.
Yeah, like learning how to create a proportionate response to the situation that arises.
Mm.
Would you say would you say it's better? I don't know if either one is better, but would you say it's kind of better to have a person that is a bit of an unleashed beast and then tames themselves, or rather a person that hasn't got a shadow integrated at all, but then eventually it integrates it? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it's true. It seems
because people naturally obviously are a bit over aggressive, or they can be in the middle, but then a lot of people are like under aggressive. What is the better starting point, would you say, or is it kind of just there's not really a true answer to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure there is an entirely true answer, because it's just different people can have different starting points, and perhaps there's not much utility in discussing which is a better starting point, because either way you do want to work towards what's right. I'd maybe say it's a more straightforward path to, I'm not sure actually, because it does seem with either way there is the risk of overcompensating and then causing the other problem. So you take the person who's really angry to start with, they learn to discipline their emotions, but then their emotions end up being suppressed, and then they eventually need to learn how to integrate them. And then perhaps you have the person who starts off being too timid. When they do learn to integrate their anger, perhaps that makes them a bit because they've never had to use the emotional control, because they've had their emotions suppressed, that now they are more in touch with their emotions, they aren't in control of them, and then they have to take a step back and learn how to discipline their anger a bit more. But so yeah, it seems like perhaps for both journeys there might be a situation where people overcompensate and need to adjust with time. But it's not always clear, because in different situations, there is a debate over how much anger would be right to show in different situations, and that's going to be a matter of an individual's values and perspectives on things. So it's not necessarily an exact right or wrong answer, but of course everyone can work towards being closer to the ideal that they identify.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, actually. Then. Nice. Any other things you want to bring up about the discussion of anger and emotions along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, so we started talking about how you can channel your aggression and how that's a good thing, and then we kind of went into why detachment is important, and then that kind of brings us into the side of things about how meditation and learning to relax and be mindful of your emotions without acting on them can also be useful. So specifically, how do you think detachment, whether that just be just in the moment in itself, or using a practice like meditation to help deal with anger? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, maybe just being a bit of a sheep, it seems like it's a good thing based on what you see in like online platforms and like how people discuss the benefits of meditation and stuff. Sometimes though, I feel like it can be a bit of like a never-ending cycle. Like, although meditation can help you calm down and stuff, if you're in a situation where something happens and you like just get like completely fucked off for no good reason, like taking like 5 deep breaths or whatever doesn't always necessarily help. And like trying to just like think, oh, let me just calm down, I'll forget about this in 10 minutes, it will pass. Sometimes that doesn't necessarily help. And I don't know if it doesn't help because myself or the person hasn't practiced and disciplined themselves in meditation enough. That's probably the main reason I can think of it. But sometimes I feel like when you're in an angry state, you do just need to go fucking not hit something, or like definitely don't hit someone, but like just kind of like exert yourself in a physical way.
Unless it's a boxing sparring match, then you have permission to hit someone.
Yeah, but you don't want to fuck them up too much.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. If there is if the underlying reason that you're angry is because there is an unsolved problem, by doing a few breathing techniques, that's not going to change the unsolved problem. However, even in that situation, I still think the benefit of meditation and more generally of detachment is that you're able to take a step back and you're not so connected to your emotions. So you're able to almost look at it from a third party perspective, and it gives you, I've heard meditation described as where a non-meditator might instantly, when an emotion comes up, they're not really aware of it. They're kind of just possessed by the emotion. Whereas for a meditator, when an emotion comes up, they have like an extra few seconds where they realize the emotion is there before being possessed by it. So you do have actually more of a chance to control it. And I do think being able to control your emotions, not necessarily to suppress them, but if anything, I feel like meditation, even though you're not acting on the emotions, is in some way still the opposite of suppressing them, because you're simply being aware of them, but that doesn't mean you need to act on them. So that's where the sense of detachment comes on. You are aware, but you don't need to act. And I think even so, you mentioned there might be a situation where you're angry and something's happened, and you do your meditation for 10 minutes or something, but you're still not necessarily, there's still some anger there. But I think the point of meditation isn't necessarily to get rid of the anger, but it's just to be aware of it and to realize that it's just an emotion. It's just a sensation like anything you might feel. Like at the end of the day, it's just a layer of consciousness, like any kind of sensation is, whether that be temperature or the sensation of breathing in or out. You can kind of realize that your emotions are sensations like anything else, and you don't necessarily need to act on it, although you can be aware of it. So even though you might meditate and you still feel the sensations of anger after, I think even if you still feel that, you are still detached and there is still benefit in it.
Yeah. I think I had it described once as, like, for example, if you get angry, someone could say, I am angry, whereas meditation can give you this sense of, instead of saying I am angry, you say I feel angry. And although those things sound almost exactly the same, like you were saying, you identify that it's happening, but you don't identify it as the emotion that's arising. You don't identify as that, as who you are. You just kind of let it come, and then eventually it does go.
Yeah. So that's what I think the benefit of meditation is. And in terms of it being, I don't think it's necessarily an alternative to letting out your anger in productive ways, or channeling your anger into something important. But it's just another tool people can use, and probably some amount of both is the proper way to deal with feelings of anger.
Yeah. Would you say that maybe like the ultimate goal, like you said, is just to have control of yourself?
Yeah, I guess that is the ultimate goal, to self mastery really is the ultimate goal of probably a lot of things in life. So yeah, same goes for anger.
Nice. Any other points you want to discuss?
I think that's good for that topic.
Yeah, nice. Well, another thing I thought about was, well, I think that causes conflict is people doing the same activity in a different way, and the difference being like the way they act it out or something, and that causes a lot of conflict for different people in all areas of life. The first one that comes to mind, and that's, I'd say, most prominent throughout most of the world, is religion. People have this basic shared principle of faith, but the fact that it's identified as Catholic or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist becomes a problem for people. And I was thinking, if everyone in the world was able to simplify their actions, they would probably realise that they share the same principles as most of the other people in the world, and that could hopefully help people build bonds with each other, even if they thought they'd never be able to like a person for certain reasons.
Yeah.
Do you think it's kind of realistic to believe that people can simplify their lives to basic principles and identify with other people in the same way?
Yeah. So I don't think it's necessarily a good thing for people to actively try and simplify the way they view things for the sake of, just being in harmony with someone, because I don't think that, I think there is some value in the conflict, because there will be conflict with conflicting values, and sometimes people need to, have debates about things and do what they can to explain why their way of viewing things is better, because ultimately, that's how you improve your philosophy on things, and you can aim towards a better ideal is by talking about it and debating it with people. You're not going to improve the ideal by simply everyone just deciding to let go of their disagreements and just agree with everything they say. But I do think it is important that people acknowledge that they have a common goal, and I think that's a great place for conversation about like values and morals, for example, in the context of religion, to start, because that gives you the baseline of you're both, although the debate is competitive in a way, it's also cooperative because you are both aimed at the highest good. And I think it's a good opportunity. It's a good chance to make it a civil debate, as opposed to people viewing people who, when people are debating their values, they shouldn't see the other person as the enemy or the person they're fighting against. They should kind of see them as on the same team, but you still need to debate and have a bit of conflict to get to the bottom of things.
Yeah, it's a healthy conflict. I just think people forget too easily the fact that they do both share that common goal. I'm not sure if there's a way to enlighten people in a sense where they can find it and like grow bonds with people over it. Like I know religion's quite a big topic to talk about, but even in simple things in life, like I don't know, like a silly one could be like going to the gym. You'll see people that are veterans in the gym and they have perfect technique and like they've got like a good workout routine, and you'll see other people that are a bit more novice and they'll have terrible technique and probably like end up injuring themselves. And I find it's kind of easy to judge the person that looks new and think that they're just being a bit silly and like they should just watch a video and learn how to do it properly. But I'm still one of those people. I think people can like forget about the fact that they both have the same starting point and they're both working towards the same end goal almost.
Yeah, I agree. I think it definitely can cause, there's probably a lot of unnecessary conflict, and it's always difficult if you disagree with someone to kind of see them as on the same side as you, even because it can be frustrating if you genuinely believe something and there's this person trying to tell you that it's wrong. It's obviously a frustrating thing, and that can, we just spoke loads about anger, that can bring up feelings of anger and it can make you dislike someone. But yeah, I think it's a better ground for conversation to start and for cooperation, and probably for everyone's progress in the long run, if you are able to identify with each other for the things that you do have common ground on. And then you can build from that rather than just trying to tear each other down.
Yeah. Well, now that I think about it, maybe you could say like the most basic principle for all humans is the fact that we're human trying to live a life. But if you just kind of focus on that, and like you said, if you don't have that healthy conflict, people could use that as an excuse. Someone could say, oh, we're both humans, let me live my life the way I live. But the way they live their lives is by disrespecting other people and like doing illegal things that cause harm to others. So that healthy conflict, would you say that healthy conflict brings about a set of principles that, although it might not necessarily be universally shared, can kind of be universally agreed upon as like morally right?
Yeah, I don't think the principles that where there's a disagreement over values, like the values might be disagreed upon, but I think maybe what you were getting at there is the principle of you both aiming towards the ideal, and maybe you have different ideals at this point, but the goal of conversation and debate between different religions shouldn't be to try and put the other person's religion down or try and prove them to be wrong. It should be to try and, improve both of you. But I think it is probably so easy in debates to fall into the trap of just trying to win the argument. And it's difficult because perhaps in a debate, if you're on the side of just trying to be cooperative and trying to just aim at the highest good, but the other person is there to tear you down, it's likely that they're going to win the debate because they're willing to go further to discredit you, whereas you're just there to learn. And because people are driven to win naturally, they're going to do what they can to win the debate, which probably often results in it devolving down into people just arguing and not really aiming, not the debate not being a means of improving both of that understanding and coming towards, a better ideal. Not that they'll agree on everything, but they can move towards a closer goal. The goal of the debate comes to prove yourself right, not to improve your understanding. So yeah, I think that can be an issue, and it's definitely beneficial to identify with other people and kind of see them as, having the same goal as you, even if you don't necessarily agree with their exact values and the way they try to do that. I think approaching things with more compassion and more empathy for other people is probably a good thing in a lot of context.
Yeah, that's interesting actually. Yeah, so that conflict is necessary, would you say? But the way you go about it and the way you conflict with each other needs to be done in a healthy way.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, okay. Well, do you want to move on to the next point, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit in the past about capitalism and how it seems to be like the proven system that works for most of the world, and it's probably a system that I would advocate to keep. But recently I've come to struggle to kind of agree with it a little bit. Like, although I believe in like a free market to an extent and giving businesses the ability to succeed, and also giving them the responsibility of failure, and letting them fail to an extent as well, it's been a bit of a struggle recently because obviously, especially in England, I think in other parts of the world, there's a bit of a cost of living crisis. And it doesn't necessarily seem right that a company such as Shell can record its record profits while there's thousands, if not millions, of people struggling to pay their like energy bills and stuff. Like, what is the point of a business succeeding if the majority of people are struggling and finding it difficult to even just survive?
Yeah, it's a good point. I guess that's the issue with the leaving things to the free market, because one of the arguments for capitalism is that when you leave things to the free market, they'll be most productive. However, the productivity that they end up aiming for, which is to make profits, although they might, so a comparison here is what, like, government programs tend to be way more costly and way less efficient because there's no competition, whereas in a competitive free market, they'll be far more efficient and cost effective. So in the long run, things, will be cheaper for people. But the issue comes when the drive towards profit and what the free market is aiming at isn't in line with what's actually good for people. So you can see this, like part of a negative element of capitalism would be making money off people through gambling, for example. Like the mechanism of gambling isn't beneficial towards people yet because it makes profit. It's deemed as like an efficient way of using money, even though it's not necessarily in line with what's good. And you gave the example there of certain companies making a shitload of money when many people are struggling, and that kind of brings up the inequality issue, which a lot of people criticize capitalism for, and it's a fair point. And there's maybe some argument where you want to look into that and say, okay, well, how are these companies making so much profit? Are they taking advantage of people and perhaps some amount of regulation, or maybe there's even a different financial system which, other than capitalism, which would work better? But I would push back slightly and say, the issue of inequality, a lot of people put it at the feet of capitalism, whereas I don't necessarily think it is. Like, inequality is kind of just a law of the universe which goes far deeper than any financial or political system. Like so in human terms, the majority of resources will end up with the minority of people. But it's this Pareto principle which is seen so much, and it's a constant of just about everything. So, the vast majority of mass in the galaxy is taken up by a minority of stars, for example, or like the amount of sunlight by trees in a rainforest, the amount of, or like the height of trees or something is distributed in a Pareto principle way, where the minority of trees get the vast majority of the sunlight, because there's this tendency where the more you get, the more you're able to acquire, and the less you have, the less power you have to acquire things. And it's kind of a law of nature as well as a law of human nature. And I don't think you can necessarily put it at the feet of capitalism. And you could argue, I don't know exactly about the specific issues like what you mentioned there about Shell making their record profits, whilst there's a cost of living crisis. But But, you know, throughout human history, regardless of the political system, there's always been inequality. And not to say that's not a problem, it's a massive problem and it causes so much suffering, but I don't think you can necessarily lay that at the feet of capitalism. And I don't think, and, you know, there's an argument that, well, you know, so people are suffering under the capitalist system and there's great inequality. But if you were to have a communist system, for example, then it wouldn't be a case of we have the same amount of resources as we do now, but they're all separated equally. Everyone might be equal, but it will just be because everyone has nothing, because when there's no competition, there's no drive for productivity. So we won't have the resources in the first place. And yeah, that's kind of why I think it's a drive of competition in things, whether that happens with humans or in nature, which creates this imbalance. So it's a tricky problem to solve, but I don't think you can necessarily lay it at the feet of capitalism, although there are definitely some points that capitalism can encourage greed out of people, but I'm not necessarily sure, you know, communism is the way forward, or, you know, I don't know what the political system would be better for it.
Yeah, it's difficult. Like I agree with you. I don't know too much about why Shell made all this profit. It probably is just down to free market economics. But although companies such as Shell and other companies in different industries, they might make this huge amount of profit, and it might not be through exploitation. It might just be through the natural forces of the market. Because it's not through exploitation, they're not guilty of anything, so they shouldn't have to pay anything. But at the same time, like, why? Like, is there not a mechanism in which, like, that money can kind of get redistributed? But then, like in the literature, you hear that redistribution of wealth doesn't actually work. People kind of need to work for themselves and work for their own money. It's just difficult. Like, surely, would something like universal basic income work, or like, can people have their minimum needs satisfied, so we all have like a basic like quality of life?
Yeah, that's a good point, and that'd probably be the aim of things. And, you know, there are a lot of people suffering. You could argue that it's less than it is in the past. Well, it is less than it has been in the past.
Yeah, like, the trajectory we're going in seems to be that the minimum standard of quality, the minimum quality of life, the minimum standard for quality of life has been rising, and it continues to rise. Although, like, naturally with any type of cycle, it kind of goes up and down, but the general average trajectory seems to be going up for everybody. So can we necessarily complain that much when we just have to give the system time, maybe?
Yeah, that's kind of my views on it. Although, to be fair, I do I lean to that side of things, but I definitely do see the perspective of, like, just because it's better than it used to be doesn't mean it's satisfactory. Like, those two things don't necessarily need to go with each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm maybe not an expert enough on the economics of it to comment on any specific solutions, but just kind of thinking about the broad concept of capitalism and how it promotes this. It does, you know, capitalism definitely does encourage greed, but it also encourages productivity and efficient use of resources, which ultimately benefits everyone. But, you know, it's a tricky one because, you know, it does drive greed, and that can lead to people being exploited. And obviously, when you have a competitive system, whether that be capitalism or anything else, there is going to be inequality. And I spoke about before, like, how in nature there's inequality, but it happens in all realms of kind of human competition. Like, in any sport, the vast majority of points scored will be by a tiny minority of the athletes. Like in the basketball or football leagues, like that's what you'll see. The distribution of goals, like, the vast majority of it goes to a small minority of players, and it goes for success of creative endeavors. So So songs, like the vast majority of listens to songs are by the tiny minority of artists, and even for that artist, the vast majority of listens to them are on a small minority of their songs. So in a competitive space, it does tend towards this unequal state, which I don't think you can necessarily lay at the feet of capitalism, but perhaps, I think there's definitely an argument that more needs to be done to, you mentioned, like in the cost of living crisis, like more needs to be done if there are resources out there and there are companies profiting. There's definitely an argument more needs to be done to help people who are struggling out. But it's difficult thinking about, how you go about doing that.
Yeah, it's also difficult in terms of like a mechanism to try and but take a portion of those profits to help the majority of people that are suffering. Like where do you take that from? Like, although Shell itself made something like 9 billion in profit in like a quarter of the year, it's not that one person is getting that 9 billion. There's thousands of shareholders. Is it up to the government to go to each individual shareholder and say, you need to give 15, 25% of your share of profits to us, when that shareholder might be like surviving off that share? I do think, though, the reality of it is there'll be big holding investment companies that probably own like a large majority of the shares anyway, so maybe they could give it. But then if you go deeper than that, that investment holding company will have its own shareholders and they're individuals. So should we take money from individuals? Like I said,
it gets very complicated, and it makes me think that that kind of trying to take money off specific people is too complicated, and it's probably not the right way of going about it, because it does end up taking away that positive element of capitalism where the competition drives productivity and efficient use of resources, and you wouldn't want to take that away from people. However, perhaps a bigger focus should be on making sure people aren't being exploited, making sure, that unethical practices are punished, and that corruption is, there should be a fight against corruption, because, at the top, probably in don't want to get the episode taken down or get assassinated or something, but, there's probably a lot of corruption in all governments across the world, like people signing contracts to, like the government signing contracts to certain companies for the sake of, because they have some sort of, their stakeholders in the company, so they assign big contracts to that company. So that's an issue with the political issue of corruption, which needs to be fought against, and obviously unethical business practices needs to be fought against. Perhaps, and maybe certain regulations to stop, prices going too high and negatively affecting people need to be in place. But, it's a very complicated issue.
Yeah. Talking about corruption and corporations, like I'm doing a law module at the moment about global corporations and like the corruption about it. And in my view, it seems like a big mistake in the legal system was granting companies their own separate legal identity. So it was in like the late 1800s in English common law. So before that, a company used to be a person who was given like a royal charter to do a certain specific economic activity, and that person would have sole responsibility and ownership and control of the business. But then came in this law whereby you could sell shares of a company, and the company would become its own separate legal identity, and it become its own legal person. So this company is seen as a legal person, so that it can be sued, or it can sue people, it can own things, it can sell things and buy things. But a problem that arises with it is because shareholders can become such a vast number of people, it takes away the responsibility for the company towards its shareholders. Like, how do I explain it? So for example, McDonald's will have something like 1.5 million shareholders, and all of these shareholders have ownership of McDonald's. Like they own a proportion of McDonald's. but the control of McDonald's ultimately lies with the board of directors. And in order to control the board of directors, the shareholders would have to have a general meeting and decide all together and come to a consensus that this is the direction they want to bring the company in. But having a general meeting with 1.5 million people across the globe is completely impossible. So the ownership, although it lies with the shareholders, they have no control over what the company does. And that's just simply down to the board of directors, who are going to they're going to do what they can to make profits for the shareholders, but they're going to do what they can to make profits so they can become profitable themselves. And that separation between the ownership or control has created a lot of problems. And I think if we can get back to a point where if there is a company that its shareholders also have a lot of control over it, but then that stops investment and it kind of hinders progress to an extent.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm quite ignorant about this. I didn't know, it makes sense to me now, but I've always kind of thought it's companies are kind of fixed things, which a company is not a person. It's interesting that, back in the 1800s and before then, that it was actually any company had to be directly tied to a person. I didn't know that. But yeah, it's interesting. It seems like there's a kind of fusion of responsibility as well when there's so many shareholders, or so many stakeholders, where, in the past you would have, if there was unethical practices, you could pin that on someone and they had to take complete responsibility for it. Whereas now, I guess you can still pin that responsibility on the board of directors. I don't know. I don't know exactly how it would work, but it does seem like there's some amount of diffusion of responsibility there. Which people could get away with certain things and pin it on other people and things like that. This is a bit of a tangent off that, just about this whole, about, how it was, what was it separated in the 1800s where it was companies could be their own person, so to speak.
Yeah, they had a separate legal identity and became a legal person. I think it was 1870 something.
Yeah, it kind of makes a lot of sense to me for it to be that way, because then the company can be timeless and survive beyond.
Yeah, they're immortal to an extent.
Yeah, and so the work put in from the past can be built upon in the future, and that that seems like it probably should be a good thing. But yeah, so what exactly did you think the danger and the issue was with companies being separate from people? What issues arise from that?
I mean, when there's a company, there was a case of Nestle. They had a subsidiary where they made pizzas that you kind of just cook in the oven at home. The production of the pizzas weren't up to standards, and it was something like 8 people died of E. coli, including kids. It was kind of covered up by Nestle, and there was a whistleblower. And she'd only recently just won her case. But it took her 15 or 20 years to win her case, because Nestle obviously have this huge legal team with a lot of money behind them. But Nestle will get sued and kind of get prosecuted and be liable for its wrongdoings, but the people that actually directed Nestle and had control over the actions of Nestle, they don't have any real repercussions to themselves for most of the time. And because of that, people can act in exploitative ways just to profit themselves and the company without actually being individually responsible and have action taken against them. They can just put it onto the company, and then the company will still survive because it's so huge, and it just stops that real sense of accountability. And I think that's the danger.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like that's just a danger of, that could also just be a danger of just the size of companies. And I guess this is the issue people on the left wing have with big corporations, and it's kind of the same issue that people on the right wing have with big government, where when these corporations or the government have a massive amount of power, they are able to get away with stuff and manipulate things for their own outcome, even if it's not necessarily right. So yeah, I think maybe it comes down to a power issue where the size of the companies okay, there's going to be some repercussions to them, but if they're a multi-billion-dollar company and they lose a few mil in this case, it doesn't really matter to them. So there's too much power there, and that could maybe lead to them manipulating that power because they know they're not going to maybe get the consequences that they probably deserve.
Yeah, that makes me think of something a bit more simple, but like, do you know when people get fines and things along those lines, like a parking ticket maybe, or a speeding ticket, although the same crime has happened, the individuals that commit that crime will be different in their level of wealth and their level of, well, let's just say level of wealth, for example. Do you think there should be like a progressive, like, way to fine people? Like, if you're worth 500 grand, should you be paying a larger fine than someone that's worth 50 grand?
Yeah,
it's difficult. It's the same crime, so there should be kind of the same penalty, but it's
yeah. That's a good question, because there is an issue, I guess another issue with inequality and capitalism, coming back to this, it is that people with money can kind of be above the law to a certain point.
Yeah.
Because, even if they do something illegal, they have the money for the lawyers and they can pay off the victims, and it's kind of a tough situation where they can get away with things. And you mentioned there how the penalty, for the same crime, the penalty should be equal, but perhaps for a penalty to be equal, perhaps the equality of penalties should be in the effect it has on the perpetrator. So if someone's worth 50 grand and they get fined 5 grand, like it probably won't even be as much of an effect if someone worth 500 grand was fined 50 grand. Like, the person with 500 grand is, even though they make 10 times, they're worth 10 times as much, they were fined 10 times as much, but probably still doesn't affect them as much. So it's difficult. But, in terms of punishing people and deterring them, it does make sense to fine them based on their net worth. Although I can see how that can potentially create problems of, people going after super rich people, trying to expose them, trying to take advantage of them. Like, people will pretend, like, against a big company, if they're like some low down employee, they'll pretend they slipped on a banana peel and broke their neck or something, so they need a meal to make up for it. Like, it's that kind of situation. People might try and take advantage of it, but yeah, it does make sense to me that the penalty should probably be larger based on your income for a fine if you do something that you should be fined for.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't really realise that. Although the person with 500 grand is getting given a penalty that's worth 10 times more, because they are worth that much money, it will have a less of an impact on them.
Yeah.
Which I think that it's just another example of the Pareto distribution, like favouring the people with the most, which is something that you can't necessarily get around, I don't think.
Yeah. But perhaps in terms of punishing people for crimes, if you really want to punish them, then we've established an issue there with trying to do it financially, because there will be people who have so much money it doesn't affect them. So perhaps a better way of punishing people is, through non-financial measures. So, you sentence someone to a prison for a year, whether they're worth 100 million or £1, that's still a year of their life gone. So yeah, or maybe there's other ways you could punish them rather than sending them to prison or fining them. Maybe there's more simple ways. Well, not more simple ways, but different ways of punishing them, which doesn't involve like finance, which would maybe hold them more accountable. Because if you just charge people money, then the rich people do kind of end up being above the law. Yeah,
true. Yeah, I guess the problem is, for every government around the world, trying to manage however many people are in their population, you want the system to be as simple as possible. Otherwise, it's going to be too complex to even function. And the easiest way to do that is just have a crime, have a penalty. People know it. They need to be aware of it, and just keep it simple and keep it like that. Otherwise, the system just breaks.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on capitalism? Or like any critiques of it while we're here?
Yeah, I think that's good for now. We could potentially do. Not sure. I don't think we've done an entire episode about capitalism before, so perhaps we could go a bit deeper into it.
Yeah. Maybe look at some of the ideas. There's a few people out there with ideas about conscious capitalism and a way forward that involves capitalism but still benefits the majority of people. Although you could argue capitalism does benefit the majority of people. But yeah, I think that's a good idea for an episode, actually.
Yeah. I think that's good for an episode there, to be honest.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think we kind of had a nice discussion. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have.
Yeah.
I hope you guys have as well, the listeners. Thanks for joining us again. It's good to be back. Sorry for any technical difficulties during the episode. I hope we didn't disrupt the listener experience or viewer experience too much.
I'll try and edit it, so it should be all right.
Perfect. All right, well, the time is 5:14 p.m, St. Paddy's Day. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Please check us out on Spotify and YouTube, subscribe, all that shit. Thank you.
Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you in a bit.
Bye.